To introduce the current oversight approach by the Food and Drug Administration, let's begin by reviewing some key historical positions and definitions. For the purpose of this course, it is important to remember that the Food and Drug Administration has legal authority to regulate medical devices, and what constitutes a medical device is defined by the Federal Food, Drug and Cosmetic Act. The Act defines a medical device as anything and everything, emphasis on anything and everything, including a component, part, or accessory intended by its manufacturer for use in the diagnosis of disease or other conditions, or in the cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease in man or other animal, or to affect the structure of any function of the body in man or other animal. Medical devices range from simple tongue depressors to much more complicated devices, magnetic resonance imaging systems, and everything in the middle. But it's important to remember that there is no mention of the technology that supports the delivery of the intended use in the medical device definition. So even a simplest app, for example, on your smartphone, if it is marketed with intended use that's related to the medical device definition, then it becomes a medical device. Sadly, the first years of growth of the mobile health industry have seen numerous situations in which this important yet simple definition was misunderstood. Part of this is perhaps explained by the novelty of these technologies. As mentioned, many of them are simple apps especially, or by the fact that many new entrepreneurs flocked into this area when generally unfamiliar with the health technology environment. Yet FDA definitions do apply and still apply to mobile health, obviously. Not just the medical device definition, but also many others, pillars of the Food and Drug Administration oversight approach to medical devices continue to apply. For example, the Food and Drug Administration does not regulate the practice of medicine. So a simple app, not intended to be used for medical purposes, if it's used as such by an individual doctor in his practice, well, surely he can, and Food and Drug Administration doesn't have oversight. Also, the classification of this technology remains based on medical specialties, which actually has posed some interesting difficulties in that many of the applications that we see in mobile health tend to be relevant to multiple specialties sometimes. Importantly, the device categorization, even in mobile health, remains based on risk, from low to high. And even the lowest risk typically still require general controls: registration, listing, labeling, quality system regulations, and good manufacturing practices, for example. In fairness to industry, FDA also struggled in the beginning to provide clear guidance to manufacturers in this growing new industry segment. And it's worth noting that it's been only relatively recently that software itself has been recognized as a standalone medical device, previously regulated as a component or accessory to a medical device. But guidance did come based on simple principles that a limited, narrowly tailored approach that primarily relies on ONC-coordinated activities and private sector capabilities is prudent, and that no new or additional areas of FDA oversights are needed. Rather, the better approach was and remains to foster the development of a culture of safety and quality, and to leverage standards and best practices while employing industry and testing certifications. The FDA, in doing so, has created a number of guidances, and we will review some of those guidances that are now pillars of the regulatory oversight in this area, including the Medical Mobile App Guidance, the Medical Device Data System Guidance, and a number of standards on interoperability that have been recognized in 2013 and more later. We will also be reviewing one of the key components of the regulatory history, if you will, in mobile health, which is the FT Asia Health IT Report of 2014. Importantly, none of the guidances that we will review in this course redefine what meets the legal definition of a device. They simply discuss FDA's enforcement priorities. What signaled perhaps a first change from the past, however, is that the FDA more clearly and aggressively than ever before started setting priorities to enforcement for regulatory requirements. I believe this was a very sensible approach by the agency, Essentially, the FDA recognized early on that they don't have the resources necessary, and besides, it is not really the wisest course of action to enforce regulatory requirements for all mobile health technologies, meeting the device definition. Remember, we're talking about potentially hundreds of thousands of just apps with a health purpose of some type or another. And for the agency, the focus was going to be, since the very beginning, on traditionally regulated devices and based on risk. As one of the first steps in describing their approach and priorities, the FDA developed what is known today as the agency triangle of enforcement. The triangle groups mobile health technology into three buckets. At the bottom of the triangle, those that do not meet the device definition. These are very simply devices, technologies, apps that the FDA doesn't have regulatory oversight on. At the top of the triangle are devices that pertain to the oversight focus by the agency. These are called mobile medical apps. They meet the device definition, they are considered high risk, and they're also known as simply MMA. Most interesting, perhaps from a regulatory perspective, are those technologies that are in the middle of the mobile health triangle of enforcement. These are technologies that the FDA recognizes. They actually meet the device definition, but enforcement of regulatory requirements is not going to be made. Essentially, the FDA has indicated that it will calibrate its approach, paying little attention to low-risk apps, such as ones that just promote a healthy lifestyle, deciding instead to scrutinize those in areas where any misinformation could be dangerous and are at the top of the triangle. There has been too much confusion at times about what enforcement discretion really means in industry, and it's worth dissipating since the very beginning of this course. Enforcement discretion is about focusing FDA's limited resources where they necessarily fulfill the public health mission. That is not to say that manufacturers of low-risk mobile health devices with medically intended use are exempt from the law. They simply are not expected to meet regulatory requirements, or at the very least, the agency will not be focusing their oversight on regulating those. I very much like this analogy that was presented some time ago during a webinar, in which the FDA explains that this is just about the same approach that is taken by police when on a highway. Obviously, if you are driving 5 miles above the speed limit, you are in a way infringing the law. But the limited police personnel available dictates that they have to focus their attention to those that are driving much more beyond the speed limit and stop those first. The FDA is very much doing the same things. And of course, as very much the police is doing, they do admit that their priorities might change. Some regulatory questions are harder to answer, for example, and industry is continuously evolving. For example, as health apps become more popular, concerns about patients' data, where they are stored, used, and shared, is surely to become more pointed. Moving on, I'd like to introduce a fundamental guidance document which summarizes the pillars of FDA's oversight approach as I've just described them. The Mobile Medical Apps MMA Guidance. In this document, FDA outlines in details what constitutes enforcement priorities for the agency. In other words, what sits at the top of FDA's mobile health triangle of enforcement. It identifies 3 broad categories of MMAs, and here are the definitions as they were presented at first in a draft guidance published in 2011. Mobile apps are MMAs if they are extensions of one or more medical devices, if they transform the mobile platform into a regulated medical device, or if they become a regulated medical device. It's important to note the definition of the first group of MMAs, extension of one or more medical devices, because it is the one that actually changed a bit from the guidance published in 2011 as a draft to the guidance that was then made final a few years later. Plenty of examples are included in this guidance also for devices that do not meet the medical device definition, as well as those that do yet are subject to enforcement discretion. And it is recommended that if you're considering developing a mobile medical app or mobile health app, you consult its guidance in order to review the examples that are provided within, as they are very useful. Importantly, that the mobile health device is at the top of the triangle does not mean that it is automatically to be considered a highest risk class type of medical device. As the FDA informed industry, if a product that is considered a mobile medical app that is at the top of the triangle where we should focus our oversight on, they would still be subject to the same regular rules and enforcement policies that we have today for other class 1, 2, and 3 devices. Let's consider some examples so that we can make the learnings from this guidance a little bit more tangible. Consider Asthma Sense. This is purely for tracking with little educational material or even links to other resources. This is a tool available for people who suffer from asthma to set medications, trigger symptoms. And tracking the time and location of symptoms can potentially help identify patterns for better asthma control. The accompanying app will measure wheeze, and you can save the data to the cloud. This is an example of app that is under enforcement discretion, and it's actually very well described by an example taken within the guidance document. A mobile app that helps asthmatics track inhaler usage, asthma episodes experience, location of user at the time of an attack, or environmental triggers of asthma attack. Despite the fact that obviously this could have a potentially very interesting health impact, it is one that the FDA has decided not to focus their resources on. Here is a, if you will, competitor, albeit a different solution in that this electronic accessory device is intended for single patient use to assist physicians and patients in recording and monitoring the actuations of prescribed usage of the medication. It is in fact an app and a propeller. And in 2012, this propeller received FDA clearance to market its systems for use with respiratory medications delivered via pressurized metered-dose inhalers, which proper aerosol-based medicine into the lungs. In 2014, the FDA further gave this company the green light to sell its system with new features, low-energy nasal sensors that requires no charging, improved software analytics that the company says can help predict respiratory exacerbations, and identifying wording patients. This is clearly one that sits at the top of the triangle, especially because it is instrumental in actually delivering prescribed medication and not just in assisting a patient for the self-control of asthma symptoms. This is another example, Gauss Surgical, that is very close to home. We are in Stanford, California, and the company is based in Palo Alto. The original app, which was presented in 2012, is called the Gauss Pixel app and is a software program used on a tablet to capture images of sponges to assist surgical personnel in the management of surgical sponges after surgical use. In essence, it allows the surgical personnel to categorize the sponges by sponge type and provides an automated ongoing count of total sponge images and sponge images by tag. It also provides a visual record of images for further evaluation. This program is not intended to replace existing sponge counting practices, and sponge should be retained as per the user standard sponge manager practice until the case is completed and sponge counting has been finalized. However, it is a very useful tool for physicians to estimate the blood loss during surgery and then decide how much blood needs to be transfused. This is an FDA-cleared application that over time has acquired increasing number of functionalities. It is a Class 2 device. It's at the very top of the triangle of enforcement. And interestingly enough, it is an example of how mobile health innovators have to be a bit creative in trying to establish predicate devices for their technologies and submissions to the Food and Drug Administration. The equivalency for this particular app was established by arguing that it fulfills the same intended use as a sponge rack, which is literally something that looks very much like a coat rack that holds the sponges in the operating room. This is another example of FDA cleared technology at the top of the mobile health triangle of enforcement. In 2010 and 12, several clearance notifications were given for this Class 2 type of technology. The DAS Joint Replacement app provides a navigation software for a technology that consists in a portable surgical navigation system. It runs on an iPhone Touch and is designed to assist the orthopedic surgeons in performing knee and hip joint replacement procedures with very high accuracy. Next up, we will begin Module 2, in which we continue to understand FDA's oversight of mobile medical health. We will review an essential piece of guidance known as the Medical Device Data System, or MDDS. We will review a bit further in details the mobile medical applications guidance and the changes that it underwent before becoming final. We will finally talk about the important FDA Health IT report and review more guidance documents, including the general wellness and the medical device accessory guidances, with plenty of examples to follow of mobile health devices.